Hi everyone, my name is Essen and you are listening to the Brown History Podcast. Today we're sitting with the award-winning Canadian documentary filmmaker Nisha Pahuja. Her documentaries include Diamond Road, The World Before Her, and her most recent is To Kill a Tiger. Thanks to the Toronto International Film Festival, I got to see the documentary and they organized this talk, so thank you to them and a special thank you to Nandita Datta from TIFF. If you haven't seen the documentary, that's okay. We introduce the documentary and we explain what the documentary is about right off the bat, so this way you can follow and understand what we're talking about. And I think that covers everything, so let's get started. Here we go. Thank you for coming. It's an honor. I watched your documentary the other day with my wife, and it really was eye-opening. And before we get this started, I think we should briefly explain what the documentary is so that the listeners know the context of it. And if you don't mind, do you mind if I try to give it a shot and you can correct me if or add something in if you want?
Yeah, I want to hear what you have to say.
Okay, well, the documentary is called To Kill a Tiger, and it takes place in a village in India where everybody knows everybody. And there's a 13-year-old girl who is brutally raped by three boys who look like they're 17, 18 years old. And there's a camera crew that follows the father of the girl as he struggles to get justice. And it sounds like a very simple story, good guy versus bad guy, evil versus good story, but it's actually really complex and it really makes you think, and we'll get into that after. So, and I also want to add that Nisha, my guest, who's in front of me right now, she's Indian and she grew up in Canada, so she knows the language and she knows the culture. So this isn't a documentary that's made from a Eurocentric perspective that exploits poverty and makes everybody look like they're backwards and, you know, we're the smart ones. So it's not like that. So that's why this is a really cool documentary to watch. And my first question, well, first of all, was that good?
It was really good. I'll just say one correction.
Sure.
So the men that raped the young girl range in age from 18 to their early 30s.
Okay. How did the story come to you? Like, how do you find a story like this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I was actually following the work of, the activists that are in the film.
Social
Amit,
workers?
That's right. So Amit and Mahindra Kumar. I was actually following them, and I was following them for, I was going to follow them for 3.5 years, which is essentially what happened. And they were running a program in Jharkhand, in 30 villages across Jharkhand, working with men and boys, trying to get men and boys to sort of redefine masculinity. And the idea being that they worked, a lot of activists are working with women, but things aren't really changing fundamentally. And part of that is because it's the men that are the problem. And the men need to sort of change. They need to change their attitudes and their mindsets, and they need to redefine masculinity. Mm-hmm. So Mahinderji and Amit, that's their work. And Ranjit, who's the father in the film, is one of the people that's in the program, that's enrolled in their program. And that's how I came across his story. I was actually following another story.
Wow. So
and
you just
happened.
like briefly just brought it up to you and you're like...
No, it was
how was
Amit.
that process?
Yeah, so it was actually a meeting that Mahinderji was having with Amit, and Amit told him that one of the men in their group, in the villages that they were working with, his daughter had been the victim of a gang rape.
And how was the time different, the period between the crime happening and you actually getting on board and starting the filming?
Right away.
Right away?
Right away. I mean, within days, really. Like the rape happened, and within a few days, we started filming with the family.
And when you tried to tell them, like, we're gonna have cameras follow you around, did they understand what was going on, or did they give you any resistance to it?
No. The thing with Ranjit, he's a very intelligent person, and he also understood very quickly that having a camera crew following him around and telling their story was going to help him in terms of the case, because one thing that I think all of us are aware of is that the legal system in India is a very dysfunctional system, and it tends not to work for the poor. And Ranjit, of course, is very poor. So he knew that having media attention on the case was actually going to be good for him and his family.
That's very interesting. You've been in the documentary industry for a very long time, and you have made a lot of documentaries in India, but none of them have such a dark subject matter. I was wondering if going in, did you prepare yourself mentally to deal with the subject, with the, because it's a rape of a child, and it could take a toll mentally on someone. So I was wondering if you prepared yourself what you were getting into.
Well, the last film that I made, which was called The World Before Her,
Yes.
also dealt with, the oppression of women in India, and it dealt partially with female feticide and infanticide, and also, Hindu fundamentalism. So it's not that I'm not that I haven't navigated really dark subjects before, or really problematic subjects, or painful subjects. I have, but this one, I think, like, because it was a 13-year-old child, that was really hard, and it was very uncomfortable for me as a filmmaker to sort of make peace with what I was doing, and so, one of the things that I never did is I never spoke to her about that night. I never talked to her about what happened, and we were really, really respectful, and she was never the focus of the film. The focus was always her father, because the film I was making was one about masculinity. When that changed, the family it became more about the family and the family's struggle. But we were very respectful, and very aware and very conscious of not re-traumatizing.
How long did it take you to make this documentary?
8 years.
8 years, and how long did you spend time with the family?
So I actually filmed for 3.5 years, because I was following not just Ranjit's story, but I was following the work of the activists, and I was following 2 young boys who were also part of these right. groups. So I was actually, in my mind, I thought that I would create a narrative with these 3 stories that were all kind of interconnected somehow. And once we got into the edit, it became clear after a couple of years of editing that really we had 2 separate films. We just had way too much material for one film.
I don't know what the ethics behind making a documentary is, but I wanted to know before you go, because you spent a lot of time with these people, and you were in their homes, in their lives, followed them around, and you knew the whole family. What ground rules did you put on yourself and your crew about how much you can get involved in their lives? Because even as I'm watching this, it makes me angry. It makes me want to shake people up and yell at them, and it makes me want to help him and give him advice, money, anything. So if you're in it, it must be really tough for you to not get involved. So I want to know, as a filmmaker, where do you decide how to get involved and how not to get involved?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's a really good question, and it's never easy.
Yeah. And
this one was really tricky and really hard to navigate. And there were constant conversations with the crew, about how much to support, how much to sort of pull back. How much are we impacting the story? How much are we affecting his life, her life, the community, that they live in? We were really aware of the fact that, it was like being a bull in a china shop.
Yeah.
We were very conscious of that. So it was really, really difficult. And there's that moment in the film where it erupts, right?
Yes.
Where the crew is actually threatened. So it was really hard, but the one thing about being a filmmaker, in terms of, because I have filmed people who are poor before, not just in India but in Africa, and you have to be as dispassionate as you possibly can, and not give funds, because then the relationship
changes.
the relationship changes, and you have to be responsible, first and foremost to the thing that you're trying to do and you're trying to say. And that's not to say that we didn't support the family. Like, we obviously,
You did get involved in a sense, to an extent. Because
yeah,
in
as soon as you put a
as soon as you put a camera there, you pissed off a lot of people right away.
But as soon as you put a camera in a situation, and as soon as you start infiltrating somebody's life and documenting their life, you're involved. You're involved. It's how you navigate that process, and how much to get involved and how much, and that also changes. It's never consistent, right? Like, if there were times when for a very, very long time we did not give Ranjit's family any funds, like nothing,
Yeah.
But eventually I started to think that, if we're pulling him away from his work in the fields to film with him, to do an interview with him, then we have to give him something for his time, just as we would if you're making a film about a historical film and you interview an expert. You pay them a fee.
Right.
You pay them you give them something, right? It's an honorarium. And so we worked out, with me and my producing partner, we worked out something where, okay, like, if we're taking his time, if I'm just in his house and I'm filming him, then, we can't. But if I'm taking him out of his work because I need to interview him or I need to, shoot him doing something, then you have to compensate the way you would an expert, So that was the way we justified it, and we did it because there were times when there was no food, right? So
I'm glad. Yeah, I mean, I wanted to help out in any way I could. So what is really interesting about watching this documentary, the experience that one has when watching this documentary, is that I'm coming from, I grew up in Canada. I have this kind of Western state of mind, this concept of justice, rules, and laws. But as you're watching this documentary and you're learning about the village and how things work, you start to shed your Western state of mind and you kind of get sucked into the way they govern themselves in this community. So one thing that happened, I don't know if I'm allowed to give spoilers or anything. One thing is that the village wants to kind of settle this thing in between themselves and keep it eternal. And one of the solutions that they come up with is that one of the rapists can marry the girl, and then problem solved and everybody is happy. And obviously the father's like no, and the victim is like no. But it kind of shows you that there's two systems of law happening at the same time and they clash with each other. You have your justice, Indian constitutional law with your courtrooms and cops and all that stuff, and then you have this village that kind of runs on its own. And it was so hard to figure out what is the concept of what is right and what is wrong now, because they have their own rules and their own system. And I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, because what I took away from it is that this community, priority number one for this community is survival. And everything that they do and every decision they make, putting survival on the top. Whereas the justice system just wants justice. They don't really care about the survival of a village or a people. So is that why? Because a lot of times when they are trying to convince the father to handle it internal is for the sake of the community. Don't separate the community. There needs to be peace in the community. What is the significance of a community?
Yeah,
is it for survival?
Absolutely. And we'll start with that, and then we can just unpack the justice system a little bit. But so yes, I mean, as we all know, right, as sort of NRIs and people from the diaspora, the sense of family, right, in our culture, in our communities, we're not an individualistic people.
Right.
The most important thing is the unit, right? And so when you're in a village, that family, that sense of family is actually the whole village. like you think of your village as your family. It's kin, you know, and oftentimes they are actual family members, right? So, for example, one of the men who raped her was her cousin. So so it's very, very important to have cohesion in these situations, because that's how you survive, right? You need that social cohesion to live in those villages. So definitely they wanted, in order to not sort of create a rift between people in the village, they wanted just to solve it amongst themselves, which makes perfect sense. You know, when you're thinking, when you think as a unit and you think about what is the most important thing for this unit to keep thriving and to survive, it makes perfect sense. You know.
Yeah, it does.
It does. Like in their in that
way,
system and in that tradition, in that culture, you get it, right?
Yeah.
Now, you said that the legal system wants one thing and the villagers want another thing. It's actually not quite true. So there are obviously people in the legal system, and you know, the law in India, like laws all around the world, are obviously set up for justice and to protect the rights of the individual. But the people within the legal system often come from they come from these cultures, and that patriarchal mindset, that kind of misogynistic mindset, is very deeply entrenched even in the legal system, in the police, in the courts, with the judges, with the attorneys. So this idea of marrying her to her rapist is not unusual, and oftentimes there will be judges, lawyers that would advise exactly the same thing. So it's the police, you know, it's not uncommon at all, right, for the legal system to also take the side of the boy.
And if I'm looking at it from a survival point of view, getting her married to one of the guys who raped her is basically solving this problem of her survival. Is that how they think like that? Is that, or is it a more of a like an honor thing? It's just it's a cultural thing.
It's a cultural thing because, well, you know, women are seen as a burden in that society,
yes.
Right? So, like, you know, and that saying, you know, a daughter belongs to another family. Ladki parai ghar ki hoti hai, right? She's not ours. She actually belongs to another family. And as the father, you know, as Ranjit says in the film, if I don't do this, I'll never be able to hold my head up. You know, it's like there's a stain on the family now, and he needed to protect her virginity. The most important thing about, you know,
her.
I would say women in general, and that's not just in our culture, it's also many other cultures, you know, the idea of her body, her virginity, that's something that a father needs to guard, right? Like that's the most important, that's her prize in a way, right? Is her virginity, it's her purity. So it's for the family honor, right? To marry her to one of the rapists is to restore the family honor, because who's going to want her now? She's used. That's what they think. It's not that she's been violated. That's not what they think. It's that she is used, you know?
Right. One of the most interesting characters in the documentary is the village leader, who is, his job is to protect the community, but at the same time, he is helping the father, but he's very frustrated and venting, and he's kind of like stuck between two worlds. To me, he represented like this person who's kind of stuck between two worlds. He would say one thing, but he would do something else, and he had a lot of venting and frustration, and he was just really conflicted, and he looks interesting too. But can you tell me more about him?
Yeah, he was really fascinating. He was a ward member.
I couldn't predict him, and suddenly, and the father, who by the way, throughout the whole documentary respects him, and says that he's the most honest guy ever, and no matter how much that guy is cursing and maybe even and insulting him, he still like believes like is unconditionally believing that the village leader is going to do the right thing and stick to his word. And it's also fascinating from because you have all these systems and structures, but at the end of the day, the guy does what he says he does, and he does, if you kind of microscope it, he did what he could do, and he did the right thing. So it was really, I don't know, it was really cool to see this guy.
Yeah, I found him, to be probably the most interesting character, in the whole film. And you could make a film on him. He was so interesting, and he's a politician. He's an elected official in his village, so he wants to be reelected, right? So he's the other thing that we didn't get into in the film actually is that him and Ranjit are best friends. They've known each other since they were children, right?
Oh wow.
Yeah. So he's torn between this loyalty to his childhood friend and keeping the peace with the villagers, and then also just the idea of votes, right? The boys are 3 families and all of the people that are on their side, and Ranjit is kind of on his own, right? And so he also wants to keep his power. So
right.
it's partly becomes a bit of a power thing for him. Because you remember, it goes by really quickly in the film, but the ward member is the guy that says to Ranjit, go to the police now. He's the one that tells him to go to the cops,
yeah.
Right? And he changes, over the course of the film, he changes his perspective, and it's political, and he's conflicted, exactly. It's a really interesting character.
In a really tough situation.
Very tough.
There's a lot of toxic masculinity and what's the word? A patriarchy system going on, right? But I was really surprised. Maybe not that surprised, but it was eye-opening to see that the women are also part of this system where they are blaming the girl for for being alone at night. It's her honor. It's her fault. She's to blame, and all these women were very had a lot of conviction in what they were saying, because they're just blaming it on her and just get her married to one of the rapists. So how does toxic masculinity kind of spread into the women of the cultures? Because I was trying to figure that out with my wife when we watched it. Why are they doing that? Because they're women and they understand exactly what she's going through.
It's, if you think about it, if you're told from childhood, and an entire system and an entire culture is telling you that you're inferior to men, to boys, that you don't matter as much, that boys, should be given freedom, education, girls should be they shouldn't be given the kind of same liberties, they should stay at home, they need to protect themselves. If you're taught that, men and women, boys and girls, that's what you're going to believe. So it's the culture, right? And we're surprised because, you automatically think, oh, they're women, they'll be more empathetic,
yes.
They'll be more sympathetic.
Yeah.
They're all they're all drinking the same Kool-Aid, right? So
they were just as vicious. That was the surprising thing, that just as loud and vicious and confident. The father of the rapist gets interviewed for a bit, but none of the rapists were interviewed or talked to. Was that did you do that on purpose?
No, I really wanted to speak to them, actually, and I really wanted to speak to the families of the rapists more, but they wouldn't speak to me. The boys, I went to see them in prison and to see if I could actually interview them, and they refused. They wouldn't give me permission. They didn't want to talk to me. And I tried sort of throughout the course of the filming, and even at the end of the trial, I tried, but yeah.
Did you have a off the record conversation with them? Did
No.
you get an idea of what they were feeling and what they were thinking about?
Oh, I knew what they were feeling and thinking. I mean,
Right.
they were really angry.
Yeah.
They were
One
angry.
of them was threatening the cameraman.
Yeah.
Um,
And I don't blame them for that, to be perfectly honest with you. I mean, I don't blame them for that.
Me neither.
Yeah, because it is regardless of what you think of them, they're still human, and and you're taking away their rights, right? And that's it's unethical. So I could understand their anger. I mean, just because they did what they did does not then justify us dehumanizing them or us
Right.
not treating them with respect.
That's very interesting. I don't want to give away the ending, but it's hard to see justice being possible because they were just like a product of their environment. Like if you were to bring justice into this crime, then you should take the father, the parents, the police, that police officer who was useless, the culture. Like there are a lot of people that are all involved in this, and it's just not these three guys. So I just didn't feel like it felt very frustrating because this is deeper than just a small just a rape crime, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean that's it exactly. It's like it's yes, they have to be held accountable, but it's so much bigger than than these three men, right? It's a system, and it's a culture, and it's a country.
That's been going on for centuries, and it's based on survival. So you can't even like dehumanize it and blame on them because they're
but
not.
It's not based on survival.
It's not based on survival.
No.
Not the
Not
toxic
rape.
masculinity, but that process of trying to figure out how to get justice without compromising our survival. Like because they are like they're at the bottom of the ladder. They're very vulnerable. I don't know how much help they get from the city or from outside, and there's a police officer there who's involved in the case, and he's completely useless, and it's as if like he doesn't care at all. And I think he represents kind of like how much help or how much seriously they're taken by the police institution.
Yeah.
So they're on their own all this time, and now all of a sudden there's a camera on their face, and there's social workers are coming from their educated backgrounds and their middle class families, and they know how to read and write, and they're coming in and they're trying to explain something, but you just can't just explain something. You have to kind of help them get out of this vulnerable
Blindness.
situation. Yeah.
Yep.
And I don't know, it's really big. And I was watching I watched Daily Crime season 1. I don't know if you watched it, right? And they don't really go too deep, but it makes you think that that the Daily gang rape that happened in 2012, that all of those men that were involved in it must have come from a structure system, grew up in a structure system like this, and then they just kind of
Exactly.
they were brainwashed in that sense.
Exactly.
yeah.
Yeah. Of course, as individuals, everyone has to take responsibility for their actions,
Yeah.
and you should never violate. You know what is harm. You know what causing harm
Yeah.
is to another person,
Yeah.
and you have to be held accountable for that. We all know the difference between right and wrong.
Yes.
So I, absolutely those crimes and the people who commit them are accountable.
Right.
But the fact that it is so rampant, and the fact that it is, for me, there's like an epidemic of rape in that country. The fact that it exists in that way is because the culture allows it. So the culture is also to blame, and that system is also to blame. And unless you change that system, nothing is going to change.
That's fascinating because the magical part of this documentary is that no matter how much you look at cultural and you talk about dissecting backgrounds, this, that, justification, whatever, right? At the end of the day, wrong is wrong, right is right, and everybody involved understands that something was wrong, was done. But it's just the layers on top is what we're talking about here, and we're exploring this with this documentary from both the Western kind of state of mind, the justice system, and the way they think and their frameworks, and it just really, it's like a roller coaster ride that messes up your head, and you come out and you're not really sure what to do or how to say it. So that's probably one of the best. I really enjoyed the documentary, and my wife is probably waiting at home. She wants to know what you said because we've been like arguing, like why is this and this, and it's very fascinating. Even I want to know. We're running out of time, but the last question I want to ask you is, the rape culture? One of our conversation topics was that like there's a rape culture in. I guess you already answered it, but there's a rape culture in Canada and America, and we saw it with the hashtag Me Too. So there's rape is happening around us here, but it's just more prevalent in India because it's easier for them to get away with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's easier to get away with it, and I think there is still a sense, a deep sense of male superiority,
Yes.
which doesn't exist as much here.
Right.
I think that's
true. Yeah.
That's what it is.
Last question. Any future projects you're working on? Anything you're looking?
Yeah.
that
I
you
mean,
can tell us
I'm
about?
finishing the part 2 of this.
There's a part
which was
2?
with the masculinity. The original.
Oh, right,
My
right,
original
right.
project, which was on
Yeah.
masculinity.
Yeah.
So I'm finishing that because I've got all this material. So that's the next thing.
Awesome. Anything else you want to say or add in?
No, it was a really great conversation,
Yeah,
and
I mean,
I think you had a brilliant reading of the film, and I'm glad you got all of the complexity.
We stayed up till like 3 a.m. talking about it. I'm exhausted.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you how everybody is doing now involved in the documentary, but I think that would give away the ending, so I don't want to ask that question.
Yeah.
And so thank you so much for doing this. It was
you
such
so
a
much.
pleasure. Everybody should go see it. It's really, really eye-opening. And thank you so much.
Thanks so much.